continuing to make turnouts. Got some more done. I can see I pretty much have the number 6 left hands. That's pretty much where I am. Everything else is pretty much done. They're all kind of, a lot of them sitting over here, drying up. And just figured I'd show this just because I was a little surprised. I had laid out, this is kind of in the factory, and I laid out the turnout, so I just kind of wanted to see, how things look. And I don't know if the Third Planet software doesn't have the fast track stuff right, or just because I'm using old turnouts, I don't know. But you can see quite a bit of work's going to have to be done in here to get this all to fit per the plan. So just figured I'd show this ahead of time. Not a huge deal. It's all certainly fixable because I'm reusing these. So I'm going to have to go back and modify some of these turnouts. This will be a little bit of a bear because this is all PCB board ties because it's a crossover. Doable. This one I just made, and I cut it off here and I extended it out to match this turnout. I'm going to actually use that turnout there. So all that rail will be done. So just kind of want to show this real quick, and then once this is all done and cut, I'll come back and just kind of show what it looks like. This is one of the things you can do with fast tracks. And again, also probably custom turnouts, but I like using the fast tracks because especially when I'm making turnouts, I can add extra PCB board ties to give some more sturdiness to the turnouts. So, okay, just going to show that quick, and we'll come back when this is all ready to go. Okay, here is the factory track work, all cut and fit. You can see how well, you can't really tell, but I had to do a lot of cutting on almost every turnout here to make it fit, because they were existing, and I reused them and repurposed them. So this is the little area here. This crossover will give you access into the factory, and then that had to be cut back. I had to actually unsolder 3 of the PCB board ties, get a solder wick, get up some of the old solder, cut this one to fit. So these are a lot tighter than they would normally be. Same here, same in all these basically, but they're all laid out, pretty much ready to go. Here's my little critter, getting anxious to get on the layout and start doing some work. These will come over and pretty much be, 3 of them are going to be kind of, well, 2 inbound, outbound, 1 kind of shop storage, 1's going to go to an oil storage area. The crossover is new, that's existing, so yeah, that's it. And I also just spent about an hour, believe it or not, just getting the rail joiners in here. If you've never worked with, I tell you, one of the most evil things ever you'll have to work with on a model railroad are microengineering code 83 rail joiners. If you don't know what I mean, trust me, when you get to it, you're going to be swearing at them. Anyway, some folks out there, I'm sure, are nodding their heads. But anyway, so they're done, but literally took me about an hour to go through and work them all. There's some little evil guys right there. They're very tedious to work with. You got to open them up with a piece of rail. They never slip right on, at least in my experience. They are the devil's brew. Okay, so that's that. Ready to go. In terms of the plan, that's pretty much, the crossover. It's this area here. These turnouts for these switches. This turnout and that turnout. That is the area right there. So that is it. Pretty much all sized and ready to get over in the layout. So, alright. Okay, I figured what I do is a brief. Now I say brief and I ramble on for way too long, but just a shorter segment on the fast track turnout, since I'm just about finished making about, 18, 19 more turnouts, and I hope it's the last time I have to do it. I just wanted to go through and really kind of show the things that I do differently, just to show you. It's not really required, and don't go emailing fast tracks and saying this guy doesn't like what you do. What they do is fun. There's just a couple things that I do, just personal preference, and I'll show you that as I go along. So here I am, I'm ready to go. This is the last number 8 I have to make. What I tend to do if I'm making a bunch of turnouts is, cut all the ties. And they have a tie jig you can use, or you can do it by hand, either way. And that takes a fair amount of time. Then I like to get all the stock rails, the point rails, and the frog rails. This is their frog helper, which I have. Just get that soldered up. And then once all the rails are done and filed, and I have all the point rails formed, and all that setup time, for one turnout, if you're going to do one at a time, that could take you up to an hour. It's a lot of work, but anyway, that's okay. So when I have everything done, normally if I'm making a bunch, I'll solder up all the frogs at once. So they're all done and out of the way, ready to be worked. Solder them, clean them up, file them a little bit, get them ready to go. But in this case, I'm going to solder that, then go right to the turnout and bang out all the solder. Now, a few things that I do on the larger turnouts, so this is the number 8. I started doing this on the 10s I made, this is the hinged socket, or the slot. I put a tie in there just because the slot's there. It gives me a little more support on the stock rails here, since it's a bigger turnout. Is it really necessary? No. I built plenty of them without it, but since the slot's there and it adds about 12 seconds of time, I just do it. I'll show later on what I also like to do. The concern I have is in this location here, this is where you cut the gap for the frog. So this is the last solder joint. And on these rails, there's nothing else out there. Now, normally you glue it into the quick sticks, at least I do. And I've never really had a huge issue. But what I've come to do, especially on the number 10s and number 8s, and I even did it on the number 6s I made, I had one more PCB board tie out here. I kind of wish they had one more slot cut in here. It just gives you a little more support. So then once I cut this gap, you've got 2 solder joints to secure that rail. That's just my choice. I'm a nervous Nelly. I also tend to do it at this end, on the far end of the turnout. Usually at the end of the quick stick, I'll add another PCB board tie. Again, I just like to have it for stability, for strength of the turnout. I've done plenty without it, never had an issue, to be honest. It's just something that I'm doing. So I'm not going to take you through the soldering. They've got some really good videos on their website. This is more just to highlight some of the things I do a little bit differently. So, going to get into soldering this, and when that's all done, then I'll kind of show you just a little bit of the extra stuff that I do and how I do it, just for giggles. So, okay, be back in about, takes me about an hour to solder one of these up. And that's just kind of working away at it. That's just what it takes me. So, be back in a bit, and I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so here you are, just about a half hour later. The main turnout's done, and now what we're going to do is do the point rails to the throw bar. And for that, at least what I do, I think it's right, I don't know. For the straight one, I'll do that in the fixture. I'm going to turn it around and solder it in the fixture. They recommend you put a little piece of paper behind the point so you don't solder it to the stock rail, which I've done. I found this cat calendar that my wife uses to be a nice paper. It's got kind of a waxy feel. I don't know. It just seems to work pretty well. And this is the hardest part, at least for me. So we'll do this one in the fixture, which isn't that bad. And then we're going to take it out. I flip the fixture over, secure the turnout in, and make sure the throw bar stays where it's supposed to. And then using 2 hands and 3 objects, the soldering iron, the solder, then I drop the solder, and I grab this to hold the point rail. Anyway, it's a mess. But usually I get through it. So I'll get this done, flip it over, and kind of show you how I do the other point rail. Okay, just to show one of the mistakes I made. Like I said, we show the good, the bad, the ugly on this channel. You gotta be careful, especially on the bigger turnouts, the 8s and 10s. This tie here, which is only soldered on the outside, but if you're a little too generous with the flux, which I may have been, some solder will come through on the back side, and then it interferes with the point rail. You can see how it's sitting there nice now. So all I did, I took this little triangular file. This is actually the Fast Tracks file. I got it with waypoints. Anyway, it's a nice file. And just cleaned up the solder a little bit, so now it sits real nice against the stock rail. So again, you got to be checking these turnouts as you go along. So now I'll put the paper in right here behind the point, and then get it in the fixture and get it soldered up. Okay, so now we're ready. So I could tell before it wasn't quite right because the point rail was sitting up a little bit, because of just a little bit of solder right there was keeping that rail up. So that's nice and flush now. And now what I'll try to do is with my left hand have the soldering iron, the right hand I'll have the solder. I'll come in, I'll get it soldered, I'll drop the solder, I'll pick this up real quick, and then with the soldering iron still there in my left hand, and I'm right-handed, so this is always a fun adventure, I'll make sure I have that point rail down on the throw bar and back against the stock rail. So yeah, it's kind of a delicate balance, and alright, here we go. Phew, okay, got it. I was able to juggle everything, and you can see it's in there now, and that one side is soldered in. I still got to clean up everything, but there you go. Forgot to mention, here at the end I use a piece of Scotch tape just to make sure everything's nice and flush against the fixture. I used to use one of the, these are actually the Fast Trax tools that are great for using as weights when you're building the turnouts, but I just tended to get in the way. There was so much going on down there, so I found a piece of Scotch tape, keeps these rails nice and flat, and then we do this side, and now we're going to flip it over, and we're going to do the other side of the other point rail. Oh boy, here we go. Okay, so this is the setup for the other point rail. A little more interesting because, again, this one's not bad. You're soldering in the fixture against this other stock rail. This one, you need to keep it away a little bit because this is the diverging route. So as I suggest, I put a PCB board tied in here to get some spacing. And this is kind of a judgment call. I've never really had a huge issue with this. Again, I'm going to solder left-handed with the soldering iron, right-handed with the solder, drop the solder, pick this up, and then carefully, while the solder's still wet, move that to where I want it to be, hold it down, remove the soldering iron, and everything sets up. So it's a finely choreographed maneuver. I have some, in the past, again, I've made mistakes. I've soldered the point to the stock rail. And I've also soldered this a little bit too close so a wheel wouldn't fit through. It's all fixable. You just got to reheat it and remove it around. Not a huge deal, but I try to get it right the first time. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and do this little dance here, and we'll see how it looks when it's all done. All right, got it. So you can see how it's done. And again, the important part is I use this weight to make sure the throw bar is all the way over, so that the initial this point is right against the stock rail, and then manipulate my hands somehow in the solder and the soldering iron and this little pointer thing to get everything lined up. Sometimes what can happen, if I try to get this point rail as close to where I want it to be so it's not moving around, because if it's too close and you come in here and you move it, sometimes you get solder behind there and it can interfere with it when it wants to move over against the stock rail. That happened a little bit on this, not a lot. I just had to go in and touch it up a little bit, but you can see now that they're going to move nice and they sit there nice against the stock rails. Still have to be filed, but I'll do that later. So, all right, so now let's get into. So this is pretty much a completed number 8. Oh, again, I put tape down here. Pretty much done the way Fast Trax tells you. Now let's get into some of the things I do a little bit differently, a little bit extra. Again, just because I'm a nervous Nelly, so let me show you that stuff. Alright, this goofy setup is one of the things, and they do tell you this in the videos, the frog, this one tie is not soldered, and it can move, and it will move. They recommend, I think what they show you in the videos is you lay the turnout flat and try to get some solder in there. I never had good luck with that. For some reason, it would never actually flow and secure the frog in. And you got to be real careful and fast with this, because if you hold your iron here too long, these solder joints will break or become wet again, and your point rails will go twang. And trust me, I've done it. So what I do, I put it in my pan of ice, I secure it in. I use 2 of these. I don't know, I've had these for years. Little clamps. I clamp the frog and the point rails all to this tie. Put a dab, just a little dab of flux in there, come in with the iron and solder it to try to keep that frog from moving off of that tie. So I do it on this side, I turn it around, do it on the other side, and then normally I'll take it out and check it and make sure that the frog doesn't move. And normally if I'm quick and careful, it's fine. So that's the one thing I do a little bit differently than the instructions. All right, so the frog is secure in there now. It's not going to move. And now I get ready to put it into the quick sticks. And here's where I take a little nervous Nelly, a little bit of a departure from what they recommend. Normally right now you just glue it into the quick sticks, and I've done that and never had issues. But just to be sure, what I've started to do is add another PCB board tie somewhere out in here. If it's just a normal turnout, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, I'll skip, and then I'll solder that in there. And what that does, again, because if you see, it's just once you cut that gap, there's nothing else except that solder joint holding these two rails. And I just get a little bit nervous. So, you know what I mean? Because they can, it's just me, I'm just nervous about it. So I solder that in there, somewhere in there. And all I'll do is I'll just, mark which tie to cut out. I'll knock it out of here. I'll take this, and I'll show you the setup. I'll take that, put it in there, and solder it in. And then what I also tend to do is on the outside, solder a tie there, a tie there, and a tie there. That keeps the gauge nice and straight coming off the turnouts. Again, it's extra steps, adds about 15 minutes overall to the turnout construction. You certainly don't have to do it. It's just something that I do. I don't know why, I just do it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set this up. I'll show you how I do this one tie here. The other ones are just simple. You just solder them here on the outside. If you use their mainline ties, they're the same height as the quick stick. If you don't, and I don't have any, so I'm going to cut some of these, and I'll show you the shims that I use just to keep everything nice and flush. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up, and then get the soldering all completed. Okay, here's my insane mad scientist setup. I set the turnout in there. I make sure I have the throw bar where I want it in the fixture. Put a little weight there. Use some of the track gauges, and I get all the tracks set up. I have the tie in there, and since it's not the exact height as the quick stick, I found that 2 pieces of aluminum flashing. The guys bought this on the job site. It's just from Lowe's, just aluminum flashing. I have 2 of those cut to fit in the slot in there. I just lay them in, put the tie in, weigh everything down, that way it's nice and snug against the rails. And I do it this way again because I'm right-handed. It's just easier for me to come in and solder, with my right hand with a soldering iron. That's why it's set up this way. These help keep the gauge on the outside here, and then I go in and solder it up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll have a little bit more of a sturdy turnout, especially once you cut the gaps on the frogs. Okay, there we are, we're done. And now you can see I have that tie in there. And to me, I just like it. It gives me a little bit more support, especially once I cut the gap on that rail. It makes it, to me, it's a little sturdier, and I feel a little bit safer with it. And there you can see the 2 little pieces of flashing I had there as a spacer. And then it's all designed, so again, when you go to glue it all together, you just pop it right back in the fixture. Boom. And then you use the plyo bond like you normally would. Now I'm going to go ahead and put ties out here and on this end, just because I want to. It is easier if you use the mainline ties. I don't have any, so I'm going to cut some and have to shim them and solder them up, but I'll go ahead and get that done, and then we'll see the whole turnout when it's finished. Alright, everything's out and cleaned up. At least I started to do the cleanup, and now I'm going to cut the gap. I just want to mention I do use the recommended saw that Fast Track sells. Cost a bit of money. Worked out great. It is a nice saw. And I would not do this like this if I had not added this PCB board tie, because again, once I cut this gap, or normally there's nothing else out there holding that in. So they do recommend that if you don't have anything else out here, to wait until you put it into the quick stick, which makes sense. That gives you some more support once you glue it in. I like to do it this way. That way I'm done. I get everything cleaned up, and I get ready to glue it in. So I'm going to go in and do this. I hate doing this. This is a pain. But you got to go through, cut the gap here, cut the gap here, do final cleanup and get it ready to go into, to be glued into the quick stick. Alright, pretty much ready to be glued in. I did clean the turnout with the wire brush and some isopropyl alcohol. Why, I don't know, I just do. I don't know if it's right or wrong, I just do it. And one other thing I do, again, never, not called for, but I do it just, again, because I'm a nervous Nelly. Right where the points are going to run, I come in with some sandpaper. I come in with 120, just right along where the points are going to run so they don't catch on the ties. And then I polish it up with some 400, just to make sure the points are going to run nice and smooth. I also run some sandpaper, a stick through here where the throw bar is going to move, just to make sure everything goes nice and smooth. And then I do file the end of the points as they recommend, to match it into the stock rails nice and smooth. So that is that. Pretty much done. And like I said, a little bit extra work, little things I do extra with the additional PCB board tie here at the ends, sanding the quick stick a little bit. What other tidbits do I have? That's pretty much it. Oh, I use for my soldering iron, I don't use water on a sponge. I use this stuff here meant to clean the tip. That's a lot better for your solder iron tips, so I use that. Never use water. And now I'm going to go ahead and get the plyo bond out, glue it in, and have it ready for use on the layout. So that is that. And again, let me show you a couple other turnouts. Part of the nice thing about doing this, and this is pretty much a standard turnout, but if you're cutting turnouts back real tight for unique track work, that's where some of this can help out. So let me show you some of the other turnouts that I made, just to kind of touch on that real briefly. Yeah, I promise, briefly. Okay, so our number 8 there is under the weights. Drying up, I like to let it sit under the weights after I do the plyo bond, and I do use the soldering iron to vulcanize it, like they recommend, but I still like to put it under some weight. So to summarize, again, that was it's been about 3 hours to do that. Just what I showed you guys today, not counting the other hour, last night getting things prepped up. Maybe not quite an hour, and plus stopping and doing the video and going to the bathroom, getting coffee anyway. So it is an investment of time. Like I said, in this hobby, you can pay with time, you can pay with money. So in this case, is it worth it? It's 3 hours, probably all told about 3. Worth it for a number 8 turnout when you can buy a Pico Electrofrog number 8 for, say, 30 bucks. I don't know. That's a judgment call we each have to make. But some of the nice things and some of the other things I have done. So here's some number 6s, and again, this one was cut short because of the tight track work. So I added an additional PCB board tie right here, and you can see that's only one tie away from the gap. That's where it's soldered for the gap. So that little tiny piece would have really no support other than that. Probably would be fine, but again, I feel better. So now I'm nice and secure here. I can be playing around with rail joiners and not be too nervous about knocking that rail. And I'm not sure you wouldn't knock it out. What you might do is bend it and get it out of gauge, or just distort the rail. Here's one I made that's been extended for in the factory. So from the frog out, it's one piece of rail, and it's all one piece of rail. This whole rail's all one piece. So that's kind of good for electrical conductivity. Some other ones, again, these are for the yard ladders, were cut a little bit short on the diverging route, so having that extra PCB board tie gives me some strength in there. And here's 2 other factory ones. I'm still waiting for the quick sticks. These are number 6s, but these were cut very short up at this end. And again, I just like having that additional PCB board tie in there to fit together. These 2 actually fit like this. They're in part of the factory. So I could measure and cut, and now everything's all set. So once I get these, into the quick sticks, it's going to be a lot quicker over on the layout to get all this stuff put back together and laid down. So now that all that is done, and they're my number 10s, and I got other work to do in the factory, but I'm pretty much done. That's it. That should be the last turnout that I have to make So, again, looking at my little list up there, might be blown out, but I've made about 20 turnouts, including the 4 number 10s and the additional number 8, but I'm done. So that's it. So now, I have to get this stuff out of the fixtures and ready to go work on the actual layout. So that's the next, probably the next step, is starting to do some actual track work. Since I got all this done. I know it hasn't been very exciting. I'm not even going to call this, an update. This is just going to be more of a, I don't know, fast track summary and update to the fast track playlist that I have, just to show that I'm done. But all the turnouts are done, so that's behind me. So now I can concentrate on working on the layout. So that's next. So I understand this may not have been of interest to many people, but I figured I'll do it and just throw it up there for those who might be contemplating doing fast tracks themselves, or do it and just want to see what some other Yahoo does when he when he makes his turnouts. So that's that. All right. So thanks for watching. We'll get this up as a, I don't know, some type of non-update video, and get back to work now on the actual layout itself and putting all these new turnouts in place.